Hey students, welcome to another Mr. Ness screencast. Today's aim is the Fugitive Slave Act, and here are your objectives. Please pause the video, look these questions over, and get ready to copy some vocab and take some notes. Make sure that you have your vocab sheet in front of you before you continue. We're going to begin this unit around 1820 at the start of a historical period called the Antebellum era or Antebellum Period. In Latin, ante means before and bellum means war, and the antebellum period refers to the decades before the Civil War. The antebellum period overlaps with the period of westward expansion, which you learned about in the last unit. We're not going to talk about westward expansion in this unit, but it's good to remember that it was happening throughout the entire period we're about to study. Now, if you're discussing historical context, how do you know which historical period you should talk about? Well, if you're talking about events that are related to westward expansion, then you can refer to that time period. But if you're talking about events related to the Civil War, like slavery or sectionalism, you should refer to the antebellum period. Now I want to quickly review what was happening in the US around 1820. Follow along on your vocab sheet. You've already learned some of these terms, and they have been filled in for you on your sheet. A big thing at this time was the rise of sectionalism. Sectionalism meant that there was disunity between the North and the South. The main difference between those two regions was in their main economic activities. The North was really industrial and was based on free labor, while the South was mostly agricultural and based on slave labor. The differences between the North and the South led to conflict during the period of westward expansion, because as the U.S. took over new lands in the West, Northerners and Southerners disagreed about whether those new lands should allow slavery. Each state got its own senators and representatives in Congress, so this was a conflict about slavery as well as political power. The first attempt to resolve sectional tensions related to new states came in 1820 with the Missouri Compromise. Missouri was a new state that was added from the lands in the Louisiana Purchase. The South said that Missouri should allow slavery, while the North said that it should not. So to compromise, Missouri became a slave state, which pleased the South. But a new free state was created as well, called Maine, and that pleased the North. In this way, the balance of slave and free states in Congress was maintained, for a little while anyway. Also, the Missouri Compromise said that with the exception of Missouri itself, slavery would not be allowed in any lands north of the line of latitude of 3630 degrees. That is this line here, which is the southern border of Missouri. So no slavery would be allowed in all of this land north of that line. Another thing exacerbating sectional tensions at this time was the rise of the abolitionist movement, which sought to end slavery. The abolitionist movement grew during the antebellum period, drawing more attention to the issue of slavery. People in both the South and the North benefited from slavery, and many of them in each region would have been happy to continue benefiting from it. But the abolitionist movement put pressure on people to end slavery for good. Okay, now get ready to copy some vocab. One aspect of the abolitionist movement was the Underground Railroad, a network of people who helped slaves escape. The Underground Railroad was not a real railroad. It was just a network of people, of activists, who were trying to help slaves escape the South. All right, two more events to review. The first was the Mexican-American War, which is when the US and Mexico went to war over the annexation of Texas. In 1848, the US won the war, kept Texas, and also got a lot of new land in the West, including this area, which became the state of California. 1 year later, In 1849, gold was discovered in California, leading to a sudden influx of hundreds of thousands of people into that area. Within months, California had enough people to apply to be a state. We call that statehood. And this event was called the Gold Rush. But the Gold Rush created more tension between the North and the South because the same question remained. Would this new state of California allow slavery? So it was time for another compromise. And this compromise was called the Compromise of 1850. Here's what happened. California became a free state, which made Northerners happy. What did the Southerners get? They got the passage of a new law called the Fugitive Slave Act. The Fugitive Slave Act was a law that created stricter penalties for anyone who helped runaway slaves. I mentioned before that the Underground Railroad was active at this time. Slave owners in the South hated the people involved in the Underground Railroad because from their point of view, every slave who escaped the South was money that they lost. Slaves cost about $400 in the mid-1800s. That's about $20,000 in today's money. So you can see why slave owners didn't want their slaves running away. The Fugitive Slave Act was an attempt to stop people from helping runaway slaves escape. Now let's look at what the Fugitive Slave Act did that made it harder for slaves to run away. The first thing it did is it said that anyone who helped arrest runaway slaves would get a reward of $5, and that's about $200 in today's money. Think about that. People were being paid a pretty decent chunk of money to report or capture fugitive slaves. Second, the Fugitive Slave Act punished anyone who helped runaway slaves escape by giving them a fine of up to $1,000 and a prison sentence of up to 6 months. $1,000 was a lot of money back then. So basically, anyone trying to help fugitive slaves, those are runaway slaves, would now be punished as a criminal, and anyone involved in the Underground Railroad could face a heavy fine or prison sentence. This infuriated abolitionists and led to a lot more tension between North and South. Third, the Fugitive Slave Law made it difficult for a free African American to prove his or her freedom because it said that black people were not allowed to testify in court. That meant that if someone accused a free person of color of being a runaway slave and took them to court, only the accuser's testimony would be valid. It wouldn't matter what the free person of color said. But wait, why would someone accuse a free African American of being a runaway and try and enslave them? What reward would possibly make them lie? Oh, right, the $5 reward they could get from the Fugitive Slave Act. So as you can see, this law was dangerous both to runaway slaves and to free black people. And it made a lot of people in the North especially very angry. As you'll see in the next few lessons, the tension continued to grow between the North and the South. The Compromise of 1850 was supposed to smooth things out between the two groups, but because of the Fugitive Slave Act, it only made things worse. Now it's time to review the objectives. If you don't know the answer to any of them, rewind the video and look again. I also recommend taking some notes so that you are prepared to answer these questions on the Do Now in class. I will see you in class. Bye, students.